6 months later, Martha Washington knelt in her garden on a beautiful October morning, her movements sure and confident once again. Her wrist had healed completely, leaving only the faintest of scars as a reminder of that terrible day when Rick Sterling had grabbed her. The purple petunias that had been destroyed in her fall had been replaced with bright orange marigolds that seemed to glow in the autumn sunlight. The garden was more beautiful than ever. After word of what had happened spread through the community, neighbors had arrived almost daily with new plants, flowers, and offers to help. Mrs. Chen had contributed a small Japanese maple tree that was now turning brilliant red with the changing season. The Peterson family had installed a small decorative fence around the flower bed. Even people Martha had never spoken to before stopped by with contributions and words of support. What had started as one woman's private sanctuary had become a symbol of community strength and resilience. A small plaque near the front walkway read, "Martha's Garden, where beauty grows from. Kindness." It had been installed by the neighborhood children as a surprise gift. Martha heard footsteps on the sidewalk and looked up to see Patricia Holmes approaching with a smile. The HOA board president had become a regular visitor over the past few months, checking on Martha's recovery and updating her on the changes being made in the community. "Good morning, Martha," Patricia called out cheerfully. "The garden looks absolutely spectacular." Martha stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. At 66 now, she moved with the same careful grace as always, but there was a new confidence in her posture. The ordeal with Sterling had tested her strength, and she had discovered that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. "Thank you, Patricia. I was just thinking about how much it's grown since the spring. It's amazing what a community can accomplish when people work together." Patricia nodded, looking around at the expanded garden that now featured contributions from dozens of neighbors. "Speaking of the community, I have some news I thought you'd want to hear. Rick Sterling was sentenced yesterday." Martha's expression grew serious. The legal proceedings had dragged on for months, but she had stayed informed about every development. Sterling had been charged with assault, harassment, stalking, and making terroristic threats. His lawyer had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney's office had insisted on jail time. "What was the sentence?" Martha asked. 18 months in county jail plus 3 years of probation, Patricia replied. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order. "Sterling is forbidden from coming within 500 feet of you, your home, or anywhere in this neighborhood." Martha felt a sense of closure wash over her. Justice had finally been fully served. "I'm glad it's over," she said quietly. "I never wanted to see him go to prison, but what he did was wrong. Maybe this will help him learn to treat people better." Patricia smiled at Martha's characteristic kindness, even towards someone who had hurt her. The judge also ordered him to complete anger management classes and community service. The community service will be cleaning up parks and public spaces, under supervision. Of course. The two women walked slowly around the garden, admiring the fall colors and discussing the other positive changes that had come out of the incident. The HOA had implemented all of their promised reforms and had become a model for other communities dealing with similar issues. Property values in Willowbrook Heights had actually increased as word spread about the strong sense of community and neighbor support. "There's something else," Patricia said as they completed their circuit of the garden. "The local newspaper wants to do a feature story about you and what happened here. They're calling it How One Garden United a Community. Would you be willing to be interviewed?" Martha considered this carefully. She had always been a private person, but she realized that sharing her story might help other people who found themselves facing similar situations. "I think I would like that," she said finally. "If it helps even one person stand up to a bully, it will be worth it." As Patricia was leaving, Marcus's pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Martha's son had extended his leave several times and had only recently returned to active duty. But he still visited every few weeks, and Martha treasured these regular visits more than ever. Marcus got out of the truck carrying a large box and wearing the broad smile that always appeared when he saw his mother. "Hey, Mom, I brought you something special." Martha hugged her son with both arms, grateful that her wrist was completely healed. "What's in the box?" "Open it and see," Marcus said, setting the box down carefully in the garden. Martha lifted the lid and gasped with delight. Inside were dozens of tulip bulbs in every color imaginable: red, yellow, purple, pink, white, and orange. Marcus, there must be 100 bulbs in here. 150, actually, Marcus said proudly. I thought we could plant them together this weekend. They'll come up next spring and bloom right around the anniversary of when all this started. But instead of remembering something terrible, you'll have something beautiful to look at. Martha felt tears of happiness spring to her eyes. Her son always knew exactly what she needed. They'll be gorgeous. And every spring when they bloom, I'll think about how much good came out of something that seemed so bad at the time. As they worked together planting the tulip bulbs, Martha reflected on everything that had changed over the past 6 months. The incident with Sterling had been frightening and painful, but it had also brought out the best in people. Neighbors who had barely spoken before had become close friends. The community had rallied together to support her and to demand better leadership from their HOA. Most importantly, the experience had shown Martha that she was not alone. When trouble came, people had stepped forward to help. When justice was needed, the system had worked. And when healing was required, the community had provided it abundantly. "Mom," Marcus said as they finished planting the last of the bulbs, "I've been thinking about something. My enlistment is up next year, and I'm considering not re-enlisting." Martha looked up at her son in surprise. Marcus had been in the Army for over 10 years, and she had always assumed he would make it a full career. "Are you sure? You've worked so hard to get where you are." "I have," Marcus agreed, "but this whole experience made me realize something important. I've spent years protecting strangers in foreign countries, which was important work. But I also want to be here to protect the people I love most. I want to be close enough to help if you ever need me again." Martha felt her heart swell with love for her son. "Marcus, I would love to have you closer, but I don't want you to give up your career for me. I'm fine now. The neighborhood is safe, and I have wonderful friends looking out for me. I'm not giving up anything, Mom," Marcus said firmly. "I'm choosing something better. I've been accepted to the police academy, and there's an opening with the sheriff's department here in town. I can still serve and protect people, but I'll be doing it close to home." Martha stood up and hugged her son tightly. The idea of having Marcus nearby filled her with joy, but she wanted to make sure he was making the decision for the right reasons. "Are you sure this is what you want?" she asked. "Not just what you think I need?" Marcus smiled down at his mother. "Mom, you taught me that the most important battles are often the ones we fight for our families and our communities. I've had my adventures overseas. Now I want to come home and make sure places like Willowbrook Heights stay safe and peaceful for people like you." As the sun began to set over the quiet neighborhood, Martha and Marcus finished their work in the garden. The tulip bulbs were safely planted and would sleep through the winter, gathering strength for their spectacular spring debut. The existing flowers were preparing for their winter rest, their job of bringing beauty and joy to the community complete for another year. Martha looked around at her expanded garden, now a true community effort involving dozens of neighbors. She thought about Rick Sterling, who was beginning his prison sentence and hopefully learning to control his anger and treat others with respect. She thought about Patricia Holmes and the HOA board, who had turned a crisis into an opportunity for positive change. Most of all, she thought about her son Marcus, whose strength and wisdom had protected her when she needed it most, and who was now choosing to dedicate his life to protecting others. "You know," Martha said as they gathered up their gardening tools, "when Sterling first showed up here 6 months ago, I thought my peaceful life was being destroyed. But look what grew from that terrible day." Marcus followed his mother's gaze around the beautiful garden and the quiet neighborhood, where lights were beginning to come on in windows as families gathered for dinner. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the best flowers grow in soil that's been disturbed. You just have to be patient and tend them with love." Martha smiled and took her son's arm as they walked toward the house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight she was content. Her garden was beautiful, her community was strong, her son was safe, and justice had been served. In the end, Rick Sterling's attempt to destroy something beautiful had only made it grow stronger. The morning after Marcus's confrontation with Rick Sterling brought an unexpected visitor to Martha's front door. Patricia Holmes, the HOA board president, stood on the porch holding a large bouquet of flowers and an official-looking envelope. Martha opened the door with her arm still in a sling, surprised to see the well-dressed woman she had only met a few times at community meetings. "Mrs. Holmes, what a surprise. Please come in." "Thank you, Mrs. Washington," Patricia said, looking genuinely distressed. I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced, but I needed to speak with you and your son in person. Marcus appeared from the kitchen where he had been making coffee. He had been expecting some kind of follow-up from the HOA board, but he hadn't anticipated a personal visit from the president herself. Mr. Washington, Patricia said, extending her hand. I'm Patricia Holmes. We spoke on the phone yesterday about the situation with Mr. Sterling. Marcus shook her hand and gestured toward the living room. Please have a seat. Would you like some coffee? That would be lovely, thank you, Patricia replied, sitting down carefully on Martha's couch. She placed the flowers on the coffee table and held the envelope in her lap. As Marcus went to get coffee, Patricia turned to Martha with genuine concern in her eyes. Mrs. Washington, I cannot begin to tell you how sorry I am about what happened to you. The entire board is horrified by Mr. Sterling's behavior. Martha studied the other woman's face and saw real regret there. I appreciate you saying that, Mrs. Holmes, but I have to ask, how did you not know what kind of person Mr. Sterling was when you hired him? Patricia sighed deeply. That's a fair question, and I'm afraid the answer doesn't reflect well on our hiring process. We were looking for someone to help with minor enforcement issues, reminding people to bring in their trash cans, that sort of thing. Mr. Sterling had security experience, and his references seemed adequate. But you didn't do a thorough background check? Marcus asked as he returned with 3 cups of coffee. We did a basic criminal background check which came back clean, Patricia admitted, but we didn't look into his employment history thoroughly enough. If we had, we would have discovered the pattern of complaints and firings from his previous jobs. Martha sipped her coffee and considered this. What's done is done. The question now is what happens next. Patricia opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. First, I want to present you with this formal letter of apology from the HOA board. We've also voted to provide compensation for your medical expenses and the damage to your garden. Marcus read through the letter carefully. It was professionally written and seemed genuinely contrite. The board accepted full responsibility for Sterling's actions and promised to implement new safeguards to prevent similar incidents in the future. This is a good start, Marcus said, but I'm more interested in the specific changes you're making to prevent this from happening again. Patricia pulled out another document. We've completely revised our enforcement policies. Any future community officers will be required to have proper training in conflict resolution and customer service. They will also be closely supervised by board members and will have clear written guidelines about what they can and cannot do. She handed the document to Marcus, who read through it with growing approval. The new policies were detailed and specific. They required all enforcement actions to be documented and reviewed by the board. They prohibited physical contact with residents under any circumstances. And they established a formal complaint process for residents who felt they were being treated unfairly. More importantly, Patricia continued, we've decided not to hire any more enforcement officers at all. The board will handle all community issues directly, the way we did before we hired Mr. Sterling. Martha nodded approvingly. That sounds much better. This neighborhood has always been peaceful. We don't need someone walking around looking for trouble. Exactly, Patricia agreed. Your garden, by the way, is absolutely beautiful and completely within community guidelines. It always has been. Mr. Sterling was either confused about the rules or was making up his own policies. Either way, it was completely unacceptable. Marcus set down the policy document and looked at Patricia seriously. Mrs. Holmes, I appreciate these changes, and I think the new policies will help prevent future problems. But I need to ask, what's being done about Sterling himself? Patricia's expression darkened. Mr. Sterling was terminated immediately once we learned about his behavior. We've also provided all of our documentation to the police to support their criminal investigation. Have you heard anything about when he might be arrested? Martha asked. I spoke with Detective Morrison this morning, Patricia replied. They're planning to file assault charges against Mr. Sterling within the next day or 2. The video evidence and witness statements make it a very strong case. Marcus felt some satisfaction at this news, but he wasn't finished yet. Mrs. Holmes, there's something else you need to know. Sterling came back to this house yesterday afternoon to confront me. Patricia's eyes widened in alarm. He what, after being fired? Marcus pulled out his phone and played the audio recording he had made of his conversation with Sterling. Patricia listened in growing shock as Sterling blamed Martha for his problems and threatened to teach a lesson to Marcus about respect. My God, Patricia said when the recording ended. He actually came back here to intimidate you both? And he put his hands on you? He tried to, Marcus replied calmly. I was able to restrain him without hurting him, and he left peacefully. But the incident was witnessed by several neighbors. Patricia was quiet for a moment, clearly processing this new information. Mr. Washington, I need to share this recording with the police immediately. Sterling's return to your property after being fired could constitute harassment or stalking charges in addition to the assault. I planned to give it to them anyway, Marcus said, but I wanted you to hear it first so you'd understand how serious the situation really is. Martha had been listening to the conversation with growing worry. Do you think he'll come back again? She asked. Patricia looked at the elderly woman with deep concern. Mrs. Washington, the board is prepared to take additional steps to ensure your safety. We can hire private security to patrol the neighborhood if necessary. Marcus shook his head. That won't be needed. I don't think Sterling will be back. But if he is, I'll be ready for him. Patricia looked at Marcus with newfound respect. The young man's calm competence and obvious military training made her feel confident that Martha was in good hands. But she also worried about the potential consequences if Sterling was foolish enough to return. There's one more thing, Patricia said, pulling a check from the envelope. The board voted to provide you with compensation for your pain and suffering, in addition to covering your medical expenses. We know that money can't undo what happened, but we want to show that we take this matter seriously. Martha looked at the check and gasped. It was for $5,000, far more than she had expected. This is very generous, she said quietly. It's the least we can do, Patricia replied. Mrs. Washington, you've been a model resident for 15 years. Your garden brings joy to everyone who sees it, and you've always been kind and helpful to your neighbors. What happened to you should never have happened, and we want to make it right. After Patricia left, Martha and Marcus sat together in the living room discussing everything they had learned. The HOA board seemed genuinely committed to fixing the problems that had led to Sterling's hiring. The new policies looked comprehensive and well thought out, and the criminal charges against Sterling would hopefully ensure that he faced real consequences for his actions. I think we're making real progress, Martha said. Mrs. Holmes seemed sincere about wanting to prevent this from happening again. Marcus nodded but still looked concerned. The board is doing the right thing now. But Sterling is still out there, and I don't think he's the kind of person who accepts defeat gracefully. As if summoned by Marcus's words, the phone rang. Martha answered it with her good hand, expecting to hear from one of her friends or neighbors who had been checking on her since the incident. Instead, she heard Rick Sterling's voice, slurred with alcohol and filled with rage. This isn't over, old woman, Sterling said. You and your boy think you're real smart, but I'm not done with you yet. Not by a long shot. Martha felt her blood turn cold. She looked at Marcus, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Without saying a word, Marcus took the phone from his mother's hand. Sterling, Marcus said in a voice that could have frozen water. You just made another very bad mistake. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Sterling spoke again, some of the drunken bravado had left his voice. I wasn't talking to you, boy. I was talking to your mother. My mother doesn't want to talk to you, Marcus replied calmly. In fact, she's never going to talk to you again, because after this phone call, you're going to be in jail. Marcus had already pulled out his cell phone with his free hand and was dialing 911. As he waited for the dispatcher to answer, he continued talking to Sterling. This phone call is being recorded, Sterling, and threatening an elderly woman over the... Rick Sterling stood on the sidewalk in front of Martha's house, his face red with fury. He had spent the last 24 hours thinking about everything that had gone wrong since he grabbed the old woman's arm. He had been fired from his job. The police were asking questions about assault charges, and the whole neighborhood was treating him like a criminal. In Sterling's mind, none of this was his fault. He had been trying to do his job, and Martha Washington had been difficult and disrespectful. If she had just followed his orders like she was supposed to, none of this would have happened. And now her son was making everything worse by stirring up trouble with lawyers and board meetings. Sterling had driven by Martha's house 3 times that afternoon, trying to work up the courage to confront Marcus directly. The young man looked tough, but Sterling told himself that he wasn't afraid of anyone. He had dealt with troublemakers before, and he knew how to handle them. What Sterling didn't know was that Marcus had been expecting him. The digital recorder was already running in Marcus's shirt pocket. and he had positioned himself between Sterling and the front door where his mother was resting inside. "You," Sterling called out as he walked up the front path. "I want to talk to you." Marcus straightened up slowly from where he had been kneeling beside the damaged flower bed. He turned to face Sterling with calm, measured movements. Everything about his body language suggested a man who was completely in control of the situation. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said in a neutral tone, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Sterling stopped about 10 feet away from Marcus. Up close, Martha's son looked even more formidable than he had from a distance. The young man's shoulders were broad and muscled, and he stood with the balanced stance of someone trained in combat. But Sterling was too angry to be intimidated. "You cost me my job," Sterling said, pointing an accusatory finger at Marcus. "You and your mother have been spreading lies about me all over the neighborhood." Marcus kept his hands relaxed at his sides. "We haven't been spreading anything. We've been telling people exactly what happened when you assaulted my mother." "I didn't assault anyone," Sterling shouted. "She fell because she's clumsy and old. I barely touched her." Marcus reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few quick taps, he brought up the video that Mr. Peterson had recorded and held it where Sterling could see the screen. "This video shows you grabbing my mother's arm and making her fall into her garden," Marcus said calmly. "The police have seen it. The HOA board has seen it. Everyone knows exactly what you did." Sterling stared at the phone screen and felt his stomach drop. He had forgotten about the old man with the dog and his phone. Seeing himself on video, grabbing Martha and watching her fall made the situation look much worse than Sterling remembered it. But instead of backing down, Sterling's anger flared even higher. "You think you're real smart, don't you?" he said, stepping closer to Marcus. "You think you can come into my neighborhood and make me look like a fool?" Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket and regarded Sterling with the same calm expression. "This isn't your neighborhood, Mr. Sterling. You don't live here. You don't own property here. And as of yesterday, you don't even work here anymore." Sterling's face turned purple with rage. "You little punk. You have no idea who you're messing with. I've been dealing with smart-mouth troublemakers like you for years." "No," Marcus said quietly. "I don't think you have." There was something in Marcus's tone that should have warned Sterling to be careful. It was the voice of a man who had faced real danger and real violence and come out alive. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly what he was capable of and didn't need to prove it to anyone. But Sterling was too angry to listen to warnings. "Your mother should have shown me some respect," he continued. "If she had just done what I told her to do, none of this would have happened. But instead she had to run her mouth and act like she was better than me." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. This man was not just unrepentant about hurting his mother, he was blaming her for it. "My mother is better than you," Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "In every way that matters." Sterling took another step closer, now within arm's reach of Marcus. "Is that right? Well, maybe I should teach you the same lesson I taught her about respect." That was the moment when Rick Sterling made the biggest mistake of his life. He reached out and put both hands on Marcus's chest, intending to shove the younger man backward. Marcus had been expecting something like this. He had seen the signs of escalating aggression in Sterling's body language and had been ready for whatever came next. When Sterling's hands made contact with his chest, Marcus moved with the fluid precision of years of combat training. Marcus stepped slightly to the side and caught Sterling's right wrist with his left hand. At the same time, he placed his right hand on Sterling's elbow and applied pressure in exactly the right spot to hyperextend the joint without breaking it. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Sterling found himself bent forward at an awkward angle, with his arm twisted behind him in a position that made any movement agony. He tried to struggle, but Marcus's grip was like iron, and any attempt to fight back only increased the pain in his captured arm. "Stop moving," Marcus said in a calm, instructional tone. "You're only going to hurt yourself worse." Sterling tried to swing at Marcus with his free hand, but the angle was all wrong, and Marcus simply stepped back slightly, maintaining his grip on Sterling's wrist and elbow. The attempted punch threw Sterling off balance, and he would have fallen if Marcus hadn't been controlling his position. "I said stop moving," Marcus repeated. "This is a standard restraint technique. I can hold you like this all day without getting tired, but if you keep struggling, you're going to dislocate something." For the first time since the confrontation began, Sterling felt real fear. The young man holding him wasn't even breathing hard, and there was no anger in his voice, just calm, professional competence. Sterling realized he had picked a fight with someone who was completely out of his league. "Let me go," Sterling gasped, the pain in his arm making it hard to speak clearly. "Not yet," Marcus replied. "First, we're going to have a conversation, and you're going to listen very carefully to what I have to say." Sterling tried one more time to break free, but Marcus adjusted his grip slightly, and a new wave of pain shot up Sterling's arm. Okay, Sterling said quickly. "I'm listening." Marcus looked around and noticed that several neighbors had come out of their houses to see what was happening. Mrs. Chen was standing on her porch with her phone out, probably recording everything. Mr. Peterson was walking his dog again, moving slowly to get a better view. The young mother with the stroller had stopped to watch from across the street. "Good," Marcus said, "because I want witnesses to hear this conversation." Marcus raised his voice slightly so that everyone watching could hear him clearly. "Mr. Sterling, yesterday you assaulted my 65-year-old mother on her own property. You grabbed her arm, made her fall, and injured her wrist. The police have video evidence, and you're probably going to be arrested for assault." "I didn't mean to hurt her," Sterling said desperately. "It was an accident?" "No, it wasn't," Marcus replied firmly. "You were angry because she asked to see the rules you claimed she was breaking. You were angry because she didn't immediately do what you told her to do, so you put your hands on an elderly woman to intimidate her. That's not an accident. That's assault." Sterling could see the neighbors watching and listening to every word. He realized that his reputation in the community was being destroyed in front of everyone, but there was nothing he could do about it while Marcus held him in the painful restraint. "Now," Marcus continued, "you came to my mother's house today to intimidate her some more. When that didn't work, you decided to try to intimidate me. You put your hands on me first in front of all these witnesses. That was your choice." "You're hurting me," Sterling whined. "I'm restraining you," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. If I wanted to hurt you, you'd be unconscious right now. Instead, I'm giving you a chance to learn something important." Marcus leaned closer to Sterling's ear and spoke quietly, but his words carried clearly in the still afternoon air. "My mother is the most important person in my world. She raised me by herself, worked 3 jobs to pay for my education, and never asked for anything in return. She is kind, generous, and peaceful. She has never hurt anyone in her entire life." Sterling could hear the steel in Marcus's voice and knew that he was in serious trouble. "So here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued. "You are going to leave my mother alone forever. You are not going to drive by this house. You are not going to call her on the phone. You are not going to send her letters. You are not even going to look in her direction if you happen to see her in public." "I understand," Sterling said quickly. "I'm not finished," Marcus said. "If I hear that you have bothered my mother in any way, or if you try to retaliate against any of the neighbors who witnessed your behavior yesterday, I will find you. And next time, I won't be nearly as gentle as I'm being right now." Sterling felt a chill run down his spine. The young man holding him wasn't making empty threats. Marcus Washington had learned many things during his years as an Army Ranger, but one of the most important lessons was this: information was power. Before taking any action, a smart soldier gathered all the facts and made a plan. That was exactly what Marcus intended to do. After the police finished taking statements and Rick Sterling finally left the scene, Marcus helped his mother get her wrist X-rayed at the local hospital. The doctor confirmed it was badly sprained but not broken. Martha's arm was put in a sling, and she was given pain medication and instructions to rest. On the drive home, Marcus listened carefully as his mother told him everything that had happened. She described Sterling's aggressive behavior, his refusal to show her the HOA rules he claimed she was violating, and the way he had grabbed her arm and made her fall. "I've lived in that house for 15 years without a single problem," Martha said sadly. "My garden has always been there. Everyone in the neighborhood loves it. I don't understand why this man thinks he can just show up and destroy everything." Marcus pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. "Mom, I want you to go inside and rest. I'm going to take care of this situation." Martha looked at her son with worry in her eyes. "Marcus, I don't want you to do anything that will get you in trouble. This isn't worth ruining your military career over." Marcus took his mother's uninjured hand and squeezed it gently. "Trust me, Mom, I'm not going to do anything stupid, but I am going to make sure this never happens again." Once Martha was settled on the living room couch with her pain medication and a cup of tea, Marcus went to work. He started by taking detailed photographs of his mother's injuries with his phone. The finger-shaped bruises on her upper arm were already turning dark purple. Her swollen wrist looked painful even in the sling. Next, Marcus walked through Martha's garden, documenting the damage Sterling had caused. Several of the newly planted petunias were completely destroyed. The soil around the flower bed was disturbed where Martha had fallen. Marcus took pictures of everything from multiple angles. Then Marcus went inside and sat down at Martha's computer. His first stop was the Willowbrook Heights HOA website. He spent 2 hours reading through every single rule and regulation that governed the neighborhood. He printed out copies of all the relevant documents and made careful notes about what they said regarding landscaping and garden modifications. What Marcus discovered made him angry all over again. According to the official HOA guidelines, homeowners were allowed to plant flowers and maintain gardens on their property as long as they were tasteful and well-maintained. There was no requirement for special approval for flower gardens. The only landscaping changes that required board approval were major modifications like adding buildings, fences, or large trees. Martha's garden clearly fell within the allowed guidelines. Sterling had either been lying about the rules or had never bothered to read them properly. Marcus's next step was to research Rick Sterling himself. A simple internet search revealed some disturbing information. Sterling had been fired from his previous job as a security guard after multiple complaints about aggressive behavior toward customers. Before that, he had worked for several other security companies, always leaving after a short time due to what the online reviews called attitude problems. One review from a former employer was particularly telling. Rick Sterling should not be in any position that gives him authority over other people. He has anger management issues and takes things too personally when people don't immediately do what he wants. Armed with this information, Marcus decided it was time to contact the HOA board directly. He found the contact information for the current board president, a woman named Patricia Holmes, and sent her a detailed email explaining what had happened to his mother. Marcus attached the photos of Martha's injuries, the pictures of the damaged garden, and copies of the HOA rules that Sterling had apparently misunderstood or ignored. He also included links to the negative reviews about Sterling's previous employment history. The email was professional and factual, but it made clear that Marcus expected immediate action to address the situation. He requested a meeting with the board to discuss Sterling's conduct and asked for a written response within 24 hours. While Marcus waited for a response from the HOA board, he made several other important phone calls. First, he contacted the police department to follow up on the incident report from that morning. Officer Johnson told him that they were reviewing the video evidence and witness statements, and that charges against Sterling were being considered. Next, Marcus called a lawyer friend from his Army unit who had helped other veterans with legal issues. The lawyer agreed to review the case and advised Marcus to document everything carefully in case they needed to file a civil lawsuit for assault and emotional distress. Finally, Marcus spent time talking to the neighbors who had witnessed Sterling's attack on his mother. Mrs. Chen was eager to help and provided Marcus with contact information for the other witnesses. The elderly man with the dog, whose name was Harold Peterson, gave Marcus a copy of the video he had recorded on his phone. Watching the video made Marcus's blood boil. The footage clearly showed Sterling grabbing Martha's arm aggressively and Martha falling backward into her garden. There was no question about what had happened or who was responsible, but Marcus also noticed something else in the video that gave him hope. Several neighbors had immediately rushed to help his mother after she fell. Mrs. Chen had knelt down beside Martha to comfort her. Mr. Peterson had called the police right away. Other neighbors had gathered around to offer support and serve as witnesses. The community had rallied around his mother when she needed help. That meant something important. Sterling might think he had authority in the neighborhood, but the actual residents clearly did not support his methods. The next morning, Marcus received a phone call from Patricia Holmes, the HOA board president. She sounded upset and apologetic. "Mr. Washington, I am so sorry about what happened to your mother," Mrs. Holmes said. "I had no idea that Mr. Sterling was behaving this way." The board hired him to help with minor code enforcement issues like overgrown grass and holiday decorations. "We never authorized him to harass residents or put his hands on anyone." Marcus appreciated her tone but wanted specifics. Mrs. Holmes, according to the HOA rules I read online, my mother's garden is completely within the community guidelines. Can you explain why Sterling thought it needed to be removed? There was a long pause before Mrs. Holmes answered. Mr. Washington, I'm afraid Mr. Sterling may have been improvising his own rules. The board never told him that flower gardens required special approval. We've been getting several complaints about his behavior over the past few weeks, but your mother's situation is by far the most serious. What are you planning to do about it? Marcus asked. We're calling an emergency board meeting for tonight, Mrs. Holmes replied. Mr. Sterling's employment with the HOA will be terminated immediately. We're also planning to issue a public apology to your mother and the community. Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. The HOA board seemed to be taking the situation seriously. But he wasn't done yet. I appreciate that, Mrs. Holmes, but I also want to make sure this never happens again. What safeguards are you putting in place to prevent future problems? We're completely revising our enforcement policies, Mrs. Holmes said. Any future community officers will receive proper training and will have clear, written guidelines about what they can and cannot do. They will also be supervised much more closely by the board. Marcus made notes as she spoke. I'd like copies of all the new policies in writing, and I want the board's apology to my mother to be in writing as well. Of course, Mrs. Holmes agreed. Mr. Washington, I want you to know that the entire board is horrified by what happened to your mother. She's been a model resident for 15 years. Her garden is beautiful and many of us have admired it over the years. What Mr. Sterling did was completely unacceptable. After hanging up with Mrs. Holmes, Marcus felt cautiously optimistic. The HOA board seemed genuinely concerned about fixing the problem. But he knew that Rick Sterling himself was still out there, probably angry about losing his job and looking for someone to blame. Marcus decided it was time to have a direct conversation with Sterling. But first, he wanted to be prepared for anything that might happen. Marcus drove to the local electronics store and bought a small, high-quality digital recorder. If he was going to confront Sterling, he wanted to have evidence of everything that was said. He also stopped by the police station to let Officer Johnson know about his conversation with the HOA board and to ask about the status of the criminal charges against Sterling. We're still reviewing the evidence, Officer Johnson told him. But based on the video and witness statements, we'll probably be filing charges for assault in the next day or two. The district attorney's office is taking this seriously because the victim was elderly and the assault was unprovoked. That evening, Marcus sat with his mother in her living room and told her about everything he had accomplished during the day. Martha listened with growing amazement as her son described his methodical approach to gathering evidence and building a case against Sterling. Rick Sterling's face turned red when Martha asked to speak with the board president. He was not used to people questioning his authority, especially not elderly black women in quiet neighborhoods. For the past month, he had enjoyed the power that came with his new position as community enforcement officer. Sterling had taken the job after being let go from his previous position as a security guard at a shopping mall. There had been complaints about his aggressive behavior toward customers, but Sterling blamed everyone else for his problems. When the Willowbrook Heights HOA advertised for someone to help enforce community standards, Sterling saw it as his chance to finally get the respect he deserved. Lady, I don't need to show you anything, Sterling said, his voice getting louder. I'm telling you what needs to happen. These flowers are a violation and they need to go. Martha kept her voice calm even though her heart was beating faster. She had dealt with difficult people many times during her years as a teacher. The key was not to let them see that they were scaring you. I understand you have a job to do, she said evenly, but I also have rights as a homeowner. I'd like to see the written policy that says my garden is not allowed. Sterling stepped closer to Martha, using his height to try to intimidate her. At 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds, he towered over the small woman. Your rights? He sneered. Your rights are what I say they are. This is my neighborhood now and I make the rules. Martha felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard words like these before, long ago, from men who believed their authority gave them permission to hurt others, but she had not come this far in life by backing down from bullies. This is not your neighborhood, Mr. Sterling, Martha said quietly. This is our neighborhood. All of us who live here and pay our HOA fees have a say in how things are run. Sterling's eyes narrowed. He was getting angry, and when Rick Sterling got angry, bad things usually happened. Are you trying to tell me how to do my job, old woman? The insult hit Martha like a slap, but she did not flinch. She had been called worse names by better people. I'm trying to understand what rule I've broken, she said, and I'm asking to see it in writing. Sterling flipped through the papers on his clipboard with sharp, angry movements. Martha noticed his hands were shaking slightly. She wondered if he actually had any written rules or if he was making everything up as he went along. Here, Sterling said finally, pointing to a paragraph on one of his pages. Section 4.3 of the Community Guidelines. No major landscaping changes without prior written approval from the HOA board. Martha leaned forward to read the document, but Sterling pulled it back before she could see it clearly. I'd like to read that section for myself, she said. You don't need to read it, Sterling snapped. I just told you what it says. Your garden is a major landscaping change and you don't have written approval. Martha felt frustrated but tried a different approach. When was this rule put in place? Because I've been maintaining this garden for 15 years without any problems. The rules are the rules, Sterling said. It doesn't matter when they were made. What matters is that you're breaking them now. Martha looked at her beautiful flowers swaying gently in the morning breeze. The roses her grandmother had given her were just starting to bloom. The petunias she had planted this morning still had water droplets on their purple petals. The thought of destroying all of this seemed crazy. Mr. Sterling, Martha said, trying one more time to reason with him. This garden has been here for 15 years. Every neighbor loves it. Children stop to look at the flowers on their way to school. It brings beauty to our community. Surely we can work something out. Sterling's expression grew even more hostile. Are you deaf, old woman? I said the flowers have to go. 7 days. That's final. Martha felt anger starting to build in her chest, but she pushed it down. Getting angry would not help the situation. I'd like the phone number for the HOA board president, she said firmly. I want to discuss this matter with them directly. You want to go over my head? Sterling asked, his voice rising. You want to complain about me to my bosses? I want to speak with the people who hired you, Martha said calmly. That's my right as a homeowner. Sterling took another step closer to Martha. Now he was standing less than 3 feet away from her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the angry veins bulging in his forehead. Listen to me very carefully, Sterling said in a low, threatening voice. I am the authority in this neighborhood now. When I tell you to do something, you do it. You don't ask questions. You don't demand to see papers. You don't go running to the board. You do what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it. Do you understand me? Martha looked up at the angry man looming over her and felt something shift inside her chest. She thought about her parents who had faced down angry white men who tried to intimidate them. She thought about her years as a teacher, standing up to parents who tried to bully her into changing their children's grades. She thought about all the times in her life when someone had tried to make her feel small and powerless. No, Martha said quietly. I don't understand you at all. Sterling's face went purple with rage. What did you say to me? I said no, Martha repeated, her voice growing stronger. I don't understand why you think you can talk to me this way. I don't understand why you think you can threaten me on my own property. And I don't understand why you think I'm going to destroy my garden just because you tell me to. For a moment, Sterling was so shocked by her defiance that he couldn't speak. He had expected the old woman to be scared of him. Most people were intimidated when he raised his voice and got in their personal space. But Martha Washington was standing her ground, looking him right in the eye without backing down. You're making a big mistake, lady, Sterling said finally. A very big mistake. Martha felt her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady. The only mistake here is you thinking you can bully me. I've been living in this neighborhood peacefully for 15 years. I've never had a single complaint about my garden. I pay my HOA fees on time. I follow the community rules and I treat my neighbors with respect. That's more than I can say for you. Sterling's hands clenched into fists. Martha noticed the movement and felt a flutter of fear. She realized she might have pushed this angry man too far, but it was too late to back down now. You think you're smart, don't you? Sterling said through gritted teeth. You think you can embarrass me in front of the whole neighborhood? Well, let me tell you something, old woman. I've dealt with troublemakers like you before, and I know exactly how to handle them. Martha saw the dangerous look in Sterling's eyes and knew she was in trouble. But she had come too far to give up now. Mr. Sterling, I think you should leave my property now, she said as calmly as she could manage. Sterling looked around and noticed that a few neighbors had come out of their houses and were watching the confrontation. Mrs. Chen was standing on her porch with her coffee mug, looking concerned. An elderly man Martha didn't know well was walking his dog very slowly, clearly listening to every word. The audience seemed to make Sterling even angrier. He felt like the old woman was making a fool of him in public, and Rick Sterling did not tolerate being made a fool of by anyone. "I'll leave when I'm ready to leave," Sterling said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, "and you'll remove these flowers or you'll face the consequences." Martha opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Sterling did something that changed everything. He reached out and grabbed her by the arm. Marcus Washington pulled his black pickup truck into the parking lot of the grocery store and checked his mother's shopping list one more time. He had arrived in town late the night before, and this morning Martha had insisted on making him his favorite breakfast. She needed a few items from the store, and Marcus was happy to help. At 32 years old, Marcus stood 6 feet 2 inches tall with the solid build of someone who had spent years in military training. His dark hair was cut short in a military style, and his brown eyes held the alert awareness of a soldier who had seen combat. But when he talked about his mother, those same eyes softened with deep love and respect. Marcus had been looking forward to this visit for months. His last deployment had been particularly difficult, and he needed time to decompress and remember what it felt like to be safe. There was nowhere he felt safer than in his mother's house, surrounded by her warmth and cooking. He grabbed a shopping cart and started working his way through the store. Martha had raised him to be thorough and organized, and he approached grocery shopping the same way he approached military missions. First, the produce section for fresh vegetables, then the meat counter for the steaks he planned to grill for dinner. Finally, the dairy section for milk and eggs. As Marcus waited in line to pay, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number, and he smiled as he answered. "Hey, Mom," he said warmly. "Did you remember something else you need from the store?" But instead of his mother's voice, he heard someone else speaking. "Is this Martha's son?" asked a woman with a worried tone. Marcus immediately went on alert. His military training kicked in, and he could feel his heart rate increase. "Yes, this is Marcus. Who is this? Where's my mother?" "This is Linda Chen. I'm your mother's neighbor. Marcus, something happened. Your mother is hurt, and she needs you to come home right now." The shopping cart suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Marcus's hands. "Hurt? What do you mean hurt? What happened?" "There was a man from the HOA," Mrs. Chen said, her voice shaking. "He got angry with your mother about her garden, and he put his hands on her. She fell and hurt her wrist. The police are here now, but she's asking for you." Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach. Someone had hurt his mother. Someone had put their hands on the woman who had raised him, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for his college, who had written him letters every week while he was deployed overseas. "I'm on my way," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "Take care of her until I get there." Marcus abandoned his shopping cart in the checkout line and ran to his truck. His hands were steady as he started the engine, but his mind was racing. He had spent years learning to control his emotions in combat situations, and those skills served him well now. Getting angry would not help his mother. What she needed was for him to stay calm and focused. But as Marcus drove through the quiet streets of Willowbrook Heights, he allowed himself to imagine what he might do to the person who had hurt his mother. And those thoughts were not calm at all. Marcus could see the police cars from 2 blocks away. Their flashing lights cut through the peaceful suburban morning like warning signals. As he got closer, he could see a crowd of neighbors gathered on his mother's front lawn. Some of them were pointing and talking to police officers who were taking notes. Marcus parked his truck and got out slowly. His military training had taught him to assess a situation before taking action. He could see a large man in a uniform arguing with one of the police officers. The man looked angry and defensive, waving his hands and talking loudly. Then Marcus saw his mother. Martha was sitting on her front porch steps with Mrs. Chen beside her. There was dirt on her clothes and a bandage on her cheek. She was holding her right wrist against her chest, and Marcus could see that it was swollen and discolored. But what broke his heart was the look in her eyes. His strong, proud mother looked small and scared. Marcus walked up the front path with measured steps. Every neighbor who saw him coming stepped aside. There was something about the way he moved that made it clear he was not someone to get in the way of. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, kneeling down beside Martha on the steps. "Are you okay?" Martha looked up at her son and felt tears starting to fall. She had been trying to stay strong while the police asked their questions, but seeing Marcus made her feel safe enough to let her emotions show. "My wrist hurts," Martha said simply, "and that man destroyed some of my flowers." Marcus gently took his mother's injured hand and examined it with careful fingers. His touch was so gentle that Martha barely felt any additional pain. But when Marcus saw the finger-shaped bruises on her upper arm, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tell me what happened," Marcus said, still speaking in a quiet, controlled voice. Mrs. Chen answered for Martha. "That man over there, Sterling, came here this morning and started harassing your mother about her garden. When she asked to see the rules he claimed she was breaking, he got angry and grabbed her. She fell and hurt herself trying to get away from him." Marcus looked over at Rick Sterling, who was still arguing with the police officers. Sterling was a big man, probably outweighed Martha by 100 pounds. The idea of such a person putting his hands on his elderly mother in anger made Marcus feel something he had not felt since combat: the desire to hurt someone badly. But Marcus had not survived multiple deployments and earned his rank by giving in to anger. He took a deep breath and focused on what his mother needed from him right now. "Have you seen a doctor yet?" Marcus asked Martha. "The paramedics looked at my wrist," Martha replied. "They said it might be sprained, but I should get it x-rayed to make sure it's not broken." Marcus nodded. "We'll go to the hospital as soon as the police are done here. But first I want to understand exactly what this man did to you." One of the police officers approached the porch. He was a young man, probably in his 20s, with a professional demeanor. "Are you Mrs. Washington's son?" he asked. "I am," Marcus replied, standing up. "Marcus Washington." The officer's eyes took in Marcus's military bearing and respectful tone. "I'm Officer Johnson. I've been taking statements from the witnesses. It appears that Mr. Sterling, the HOA enforcement officer, became physically aggressive with your mother during a dispute about her garden." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, but he kept his voice calm. "Has he been arrested?" "We're still investigating," Officer Johnson said carefully. "There are conflicting accounts of what happened. Mr. Sterling claims your mother fell accidentally during a normal conversation." Marcus looked over at Sterling again. The man was still talking loudly, trying to convince another officer that he had done nothing wrong. Several neighbors were shaking their heads and pointing at him. "What do the witnesses say?" Marcus asked. Officer Johnson consulted his notepad. "Multiple neighbors saw Mr. Sterling grab your mother's arm aggressively. One neighbor recorded part of the incident on his phone. The video shows your mother falling after Mr. Sterling made contact with her." Marcus nodded slowly. "So there's evidence?" "Yes, there is," Officer Johnson confirmed. "We'll be reviewing everything carefully." Marcus looked down at his mother, who was watching him with worried eyes. Martha knew her son well enough to recognize the signs that he was fighting to control his temper. She could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw was set. "Marcus," Martha said quietly, "I need you to stay calm. This isn't worth you getting in trouble." Marcus knelt down beside his mother again and took her uninjured hand in both of his. "Mom, I promise you that I will handle this the right way. But I need you to know that no one is ever going to hurt you again. Not while I'm here." The quiet certainty in Marcus's voice made Martha feel safer than she had all morning, but it also made her worry about what her son might do if Sterling pushed him too far. Across the yard, Rick Sterling finished talking to the police officer and looked around for the first time at the crowd of neighbors. His eyes fell on Marcus, who was kneeling beside Martha on the porch steps. Sterling had not noticed Martha's son arrive, and the sight of the tall, powerfully built young man surprised him. This was not what he had expected. Sterling had assumed that Martha was alone and vulnerable. The presence of a capable-looking son changed the situation considerably. But Sterling's pride and anger made him do something incredibly stupid. Instead of walking away and letting the police handle the situation, he decided to approach Marcus directly. "You must be Martha's boy," Sterling called out as he walked across the lawn toward the porch. "I hope you can talk some sense into your mother. She's been very difficult to work with." Marcus stood up slowly and turned to face Sterling. The two men were about the same height, but Marcus's military conditioning made him appear much more formidable. His posture was relaxed but ready, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said in a voice that was perfectly polite and absolutely terrifying, "I think you and I need to have a conversation." Rick Sterling's large hand closed around Martha's upper arm like a vice. His fingers dug into her soft flesh through the thin fabric of her gardening shirt. Martha gasped in surprise and pain. No one had put their hands on her in anger for more years than she could remember. "Let go of me," Martha said, trying to pull away from Sterling's grip. But the big man was much stronger than she was, and his fingers only tightened around her arm. "You're going to listen to me now," Sterling said, his face inches from hers. Spit flew from his mouth as he spoke, and his breath was hot and angry. "I'm tired of your attitude. I'm tired of your questions. And I'm tired of you acting like you're better than me." Martha felt panic rising in her chest. Sterling's grip was hurting her arm badly, and she could feel bruises forming under his fingers. She looked around desperately for help, but the neighbors who had been watching from a distance seemed too shocked to move. "Please let go of me," Martha said again, her voice shaking now. "You're hurting me." Sterling's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. "Good," he said with a cruel smile. "Maybe now you'll start taking me seriously. I'm not some pushover you can walk all over. I'm the law in this neighborhood." Martha tried to twist away from Sterling, but the movement made him angry again. "Stop fighting me," he yelled, jerking her arm so hard that Martha stumbled sideways. Her foot caught on the edge of the flower bed and she lost her balance completely. Martha fell backward into her garden, landing hard on her hip and shoulder. Pain shot through her body as she hit the ground. Her right wrist bent underneath her as she tried to break her fall, sending sharp agony up her arm. Several of her newly planted petunias were crushed beneath her. For a moment, Martha lay stunned on the ground among her flowers. She could taste blood in her mouth where she had bitten her tongue. Her wrist throbbed with pain, and she could feel wetness on her cheek where a rose thorn had scratched her face. Sterling stood over her, breathing heavily. Part of him was shocked by what had just happened.
He hadn't meant to make her fall.
He had only wanted to teach her a lesson about respecting his authority. But another part of him felt satisfied. The old woman had finally learned who was in charge. "Look what you made me do," Sterling said, looking down at Martha. "This wouldn't have happened if you had just listened to me in the first place." Martha struggled to sit up, cradling her injured wrist against her chest. Every movement sent pain through her body. She felt dirt in her hair and could see blood on her gardening gloves from the rose thorns. "Help me," Martha called out weakly to the neighbors who were watching. "Someone please help me." Mrs. Chen dropped her coffee mug and started running across the street toward Martha. The elderly man with the dog pulled out his cell phone and began dialing numbers. Other neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by Sterling's shouting and Martha's cry for help. Sterling realized he was in trouble. Too many people had seen what happened. He looked around at the growing crowd of witnesses and felt the first stirrings of real fear. This had not gone the way he planned. "She fell on her own," Sterling announced loudly to the gathering neighbors. "I barely touched her. She's just clumsy." Mrs. Chen reached Martha and knelt down beside her in the dirt. "Martha, are you okay?" she asked gently, helping the older woman sit up more comfortably. "My wrist," Martha whispered. "I think it might be broken." Mrs. Chen looked up at Sterling with disgust. "What is wrong with you? She's an old woman. How could you hurt her like this?" Sterling's face reddened again. "I didn't hurt anyone. She fell because she wasn't watching where she was going. It's not my fault she's clumsy." "We all saw what happened," said the elderly man with the dog. He was holding his phone up, and Sterling realized with horror that the man might have recorded the whole thing. "You grabbed her arm and made her fall." "You're lying," Sterling said desperately. "I never laid a hand on her." But more neighbors were arriving now, and they had all heard Sterling shouting and seen Martha on the ground. A young mother with a baby stroller shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe you would attack an elderly woman over some flowers." Sterling looked around at the circle of hostile faces surrounding him. Everyone was staring at him like he was a monster. This was not how things were supposed to go. He was the authority figure here. He was supposed to be respected and obeyed, not treated like a criminal. She was resisting lawful orders, Sterling said, trying to regain control of the situation. "She was in violation of HOA regulations and she refused to comply when I told her to fix the problem." "So you assaulted her?" Mrs. Chen asked incredulously. "You think HOA regulations give you the right to put your hands on people?" Martha was listening to the argument swirling around her, but she felt strangely disconnected from it all. The pain in her wrist was making her feel dizzy and sick. She could see her beautiful petunias crushed and scattered around her, their purple petals mixed with dirt and blood. "I want to go inside," Martha said quietly to Mrs. Chen. "Can you help me get up?" Mrs. Chen and another neighbor carefully helped Martha stand. She swayed slightly, still dizzy from the fall and the shock of what had happened. Her wrist was swelling now and she could barely move her fingers. Sterling watched Martha struggle to her feet and felt a moment of what might have been regret. The old woman looked so small and frail, standing there covered in dirt with tears in her eyes. For just a second, he wondered if he had gone too far. But then Sterling heard someone in the crowd call him a bully, and the regret vanished. These people didn't understand what it was like to have a job to do and have everyone fighting you every step of the way. The old woman had brought this on herself by refusing to follow the rules. "This isn't over," Sterling called out as Mrs. Chen helped Martha walk toward her house. "You still have 7 days to remove those flowers or there will be consequences." Martha stopped walking and turned around slowly. Despite her pain and shock, she looked Sterling directly in the eyes. "The only consequences here will be for you," she said in a voice that was quiet but filled with steel. "What you did to me was assault, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Sterling laughed, but it sounded forced and nervous. "Who's going to believe you? You're just a bitter old woman who fell down in her own garden." Martha didn't answer. Instead, she let Mrs. Chen help her into the house. But as they walked up the front steps, Martha was already thinking about what she needed to do next. She needed to document her injuries. She needed to call the police. And most importantly, she needed to call her son, Marcus. Sterling stood in Martha's crushed garden surrounded by hostile neighbors who were taking pictures with their phones and talking in low, angry voices. He realized that everything had changed in the last few minutes. What had started as a simple enforcement action had turned into something much more serious. The elderly man with the dog approached Sterling with his phone still in his hand. "I recorded the whole thing," he said calmly. "And I'm going to give this video to the police when they get here." "The police?" Sterling asked, trying to sound unconcerned. "Nobody called the police." "I did," the man replied. "Right after you attacked Mrs. Washington. They should be here any minute." Sterling felt panic rising in his throat. He had not planned for this. The whole situation had spiraled out of control, and now he might be facing real consequences for his actions. As if on cue, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, getting closer. Sterling looked around at the neighbors who were all staring at him with disgust and anger. He realized that his attempt to establish authority in the neighborhood had backfired spectacularly. Inside her house, Martha sat at her kitchen table while Mrs. Chen helped clean the dirt and blood from her face. Her wrist was throbbing and she knew she would need to see a doctor. But more than the physical pain, Martha felt a deep sadness about what had happened to her peaceful morning and her beautiful garden. "I need to call my son," Martha said quietly. Mrs. Chen nodded. "Of course. Is there anything else I can do?" Martha looked out her kitchen window at the crowd of neighbors still gathered around Rick Sterling. The police cars were pulling up to the curb now, their red and blue lights flashing. "Just stay with me until Marcus gets here," Martha said. "I don't think Mr. Sterling is done causing trouble yet." The morning sun painted the quiet streets of Willowbrook Heights with a golden glow. Martha Washington knelt in her front garden, her weathered hands gently placing purple petunias into the dark soil. At 65 years old, she moved with the careful grace of someone who had learned to treasure each peaceful moment life offered. Martha had called this small corner of suburbia home for 15 years. Her modest 2-story house sat on Maple Street, surrounded by similar homes with well-kept lawns and white picket fences. The neighborhood was the kind of place where children rode bicycles on sidewalks and neighbors waved to each other from their porches. The garden was Martha's pride and joy. She had started it the year she moved in, transforming a patch of plain grass into a colorful display of flowers that bloomed from spring through fall. Roses climbed a small trellis near her front steps. Bright yellow marigolds lined the walkway. Purple and pink petunias filled the spaces between, creating a rainbow that made everyone who passed by smile. Martha wiped her forehead with the back of her gardening glove. The April morning was warming up quickly, promising a beautiful spring day. She had risen early to plant the new flowers she had bought at the garden center yesterday. There was something peaceful about working in the dirt before the world woke up. It reminded her of her childhood, helping her grandmother tend vegetables behind their old farmhouse. After 30 years of teaching 3rd grade, Martha had retired 5 years ago. She missed the children sometimes, but she loved having time for the things that made her happy. Her garden was one of those things. So was cooking for her church potlucks and volunteering at the local food bank every Tuesday morning. The sound of a car door closing made Martha look up. Across the street, her neighbor Mrs. Chen was leaving for work, coffee mug in hand. The two women waved to each other. Mrs. Chen had moved in 3 years ago with her husband and twin boys. Martha had brought them a casserole on their first day, and they had been friends ever since. Martha stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Her joints protested a little more each year, but she refused to let age stop her from doing what she loved. She picked up her watering can and walked to the side of the house where the hose was connected. As water filled the metal can, Martha thought about her son, Marcus. He was coming to visit this weekend for the first time in 8 months. Her heart filled with pride thinking about him. Marcus was 32 years old and served as an Army Ranger. He had been deployed overseas for most of the past 2 years, and Martha had missed him terribly. The last time they spoke on the phone, Marcus had sounded tired. He never talked much about what he did during his deployments, but Martha could hear the weight in his voice. She hoped this visit would give him a chance to rest and feel safe. There was nothing she wanted more than to take care of her son the way she had when he was small. Martha carried the watering can back to her flowers. The morning air smelled like fresh grass and the neighbor's coffee. A few houses down, someone was starting their lawnmower. It was the kind of ordinary Saturday morning that Martha had learned not to take for granted. She had not always lived in such peace. Growing up in Alabama in the 1960s, Martha had seen enough hatred and violence to last several lifetimes. Her parents had worked hard to give her opportunities they never had. Her father cleaned offices downtown while her mother took in laundry from wealthy families. They saved every penny so Martha could go to college and become a teacher. Martha had never forgotten those lessons about hard work and treating people with respect. Even when others were unkind to her, she chose to respond with grace. It was not always easy, but it was the right thing to do. She had tried to teach Marcus the same values, and she was proud of the man he had become. The flowers seemed to perk up as Martha watered them. She talked to her plants while she worked, the way her grandmother had taught her. "There you go, little ones," she said softly. "Drink up and grow strong." Some people thought talking to plants was silly, but Martha believed everything living thing deserved kindness. Martha was adjusting the soil around a rose bush when she noticed someone walking down the sidewalk toward her house. The man was wearing a uniform she did not recognize. He was tall and heavy with short gray hair and a serious expression. A badge gleamed on his shirt pocket, and he carried a clipboard in his hands. The man stopped at the edge of Martha's property and looked around with sharp eyes. Martha had never seen him before, which was unusual. She knew most of the people in the neighborhood, at least by sight. This man had the bearing of someone used to giving orders and expecting them to be followed. Martha stood up and dusted off her hands. She was naturally friendly and always ready to help if someone needed directions or information. "Good morning," she called out with a warm smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The man did not return her smile. Instead, he looked down at his clipboard and then back at her garden. "Are you the homeowner?" he asked in a flat voice. "Yes, I am," Martha replied. "I'm Martha Washington. Have we met?" "Rick Sterling," the man said without offering his hand. "I'm the new community enforcement officer for the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association." Martha felt a small flutter of confusion. She had been part of the HOA for 15 years and had never heard of an enforcement officer before. The association had always been run by a volunteer board of neighbors who met once a month to discuss community issues like snow removal and the annual block party. "I didn't know we had an enforcement officer," Martha said politely. "When did that start?" Sterling ignored her question. Instead, he stepped closer to her garden and began writing something on his clipboard. "I'm conducting inspections of properties that may be in violation of HOA regulations," he said without looking up. Martha's smile faded slightly. She kept her voice calm and friendly, but she felt a growing sense of unease. "Violation? I'm not sure what you mean. I have maintained this garden for 15 years without any problems." Sterling looked up from his clipboard with cold eyes. "That may be, but things have changed. The board has decided to enforce the rules more strictly. Your landscaping modifications were never properly approved." Martha felt her heart skip a beat. She had lived here peacefully for so long, that she had almost forgotten there were people in the world who looked for reasons to cause trouble. But she had learned long ago that the best way to handle difficult situations was with patience and respect. "I think there might be some confusion," Martha said gently. "When I first planted my garden, I checked with the HOA board. Mrs. Patterson, who was president then, said it looked lovely and encouraged me to keep it up." Sterling's expression hardened. "Mrs. Patterson retired from the board 2 years ago. Her approvals don't matter anymore." He made another note on his clipboard. "These plants need to be removed within 7 days or you'll face fines and legal action." Martha stared at him in shock. The flowers she had lovingly tended for 15 years would be destroyed. The garden that brought joy to everyone who saw it would be gone. The thought made her feel sick, but Martha Washington had not survived 65 years by giving up at the first sign of trouble. She straightened her shoulders and looked Rick Sterling in the eye. "I'd like to see the specific regulation I'm violating," she said quietly. "And I'd like to speak with the current board president about this matter." Something dangerous flashed in Sterling's eyes. Martha realized she had just made an enemy.